Picture this: snow-swept fjords glittering under a pale sun, pine forests so dense your breath fogs in the air, and a coastline carved by glaciers into 1,000 narrow harbors. When most people think of World War II, they picture the beaches of Normandy, the rubble of Stalingrad, or the blackened decks at Pearl Harbor. But far to the north, beneath auroras and heavy skies, another vital struggle unfolded, quieter in most histories but no less consequential. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. 4 nations, 4 very different wartime paths. This is the story of Scandinavia in World War II, the hidden northern front that helped shape the outcome of the war. You might think Scandinavia was a peripheral theater, remote and irrelevant to the main events on the continent. But in 1939 and 1940, that region was shockingly central to both strategy and survival. The detail you need to hang on to is iron. Germany's war machine relied heavily on Swedish iron ore, high quality, reliably mined, and during the winter months, that ore traveled along an exposed route through the Norwegian port of Narvik. Cut that route and German industry would choke. But it wasn't just ore. Control of Norway's coastline meant control of access to the North Atlantic. Whoever ruled those fjords could position submarines and aircraft to menace Allied shipping lanes and protect their own convoys. Norway's long, rugged coast offered natural harbors and hidden anchorages, perfect for naval bases and, crucially, for projecting power into the Atlantic. For Britain, denying Germany those bases was vital. For Germany, securing Norway was a matter of national survival and strategic advantage. So while tanks rolled across Poland and diplomatic cables crackled in Western capitals, both sides kept a close, watchful eye on Scandinavia. The north was remote, yes, but its resources, ports, and geography made it strategically essential. Now move east to Finland, where the cold becomes a weapon. In November 1939, before Germany had launched operations in Norway or Denmark, the Soviet Union struck. The Winter War began when Soviet forces invaded Finland, expecting a quick capitulation. Their planners had assumed the Red Army's overwhelming numbers and material advantage would make short work of a much smaller neighbor. What followed shattered those expectations. Finland fought like a cornered wolf. Finnish ski troops melted into the forests and used the terrain to their advantage. Hit-and-run raids, ambushes on frozen roads, and an intimate knowledge of how to move and survive in sub-zero temperatures. The Finns improvised clothing, weaponry, and tactics. They used mobility and camouflage to negate Soviet numerical superiority. The result was a staggering toll on Soviet forces. Casualties were far higher than Moscow had anticipated, and Finnish resilience captured the world's attention. In the end, Finland had to cede territory in the Treaty of Moscow in March 1940, but it kept its independence, a remarkable outcome given the odds. The story didn't end there. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Finland saw an opportunity and aligned with German forces in what became the Continuation War, primarily to reclaim lost territory. Importantly, Finland retained its own command structures and political independence. It was a co-belligerent, not a puppet. By 1944, the tide turned again. Finland negotiated peace with the Soviet Union, paid reparations, and fought to expel German troops from its northern Lapland region. The Finnish arc during the war is a study in sovereignty under pressure and the brutal arithmetic of survival. Now picture April 9, 1940. The sun is up early over low-lying fields and narrow straits, and at dawn, German forces begin Operation Weserübung, the simultaneous invasion of Denmark and Norway. Denmark's case is almost tragic in its brevity. Facing a rapid and overwhelming assault, with no realistic way to resist without massive civilian casualties and destruction, Denmark's government chose surrender within hours. The Danish monarchy and government remained in place initially, seeking to preserve a degree of national continuity and to protect the population. Occupation in Denmark settled into a peculiar rhythm. It was one of the more lightly administered German occupations early on, partly because Germany wanted to keep Danish agriculture and industry functioning. Daily life continued with a surreal normality. Trains ran, farmers harvested, shops opened, even as the Gestapo and German soldiers imposed restrictions and monitored dissent. Over time, however, resistance grew. Sabotage acts, strikes, and underground newspapers increased the pressure on the occupiers. One of the most remarkable and humane Danish stories came in 1943. As the threat of deportations of Danish Jews loomed, ordinary citizens, fishermen, and members of the resistance organized a massive improvised rescue. Thousands of Danish Jews were ferried across the Øresund to neutral Sweden. Boats, small fishing vessels, private yachts, any craft available carried families through dark nights to safety. It's a powerful example of collective courage, a population refusing to let their neighbors be taken. Norway's invasion unfolded with more drama and theater. Germany aimed to secure fjords and ports, and it struck hard. Key locations like Oslo and the vital ice-free port of Narvik were seized by German forces using airborne troops and naval landings. Allied forces, British, French, and Polish, attempted to intervene, and Narvik became a bloody early showdown. But as German forces turned their attention to the Low Countries and France, the Allies were forced to withdraw, and Norway fell largely under German occupation. The collaborationist government led by Vidkun Quisling took power under German auspices. His name would become synonymous with betrayal. Yet the Norwegian story is not only one of defeat and imposition, it's also one of resistance that was both inventive and persistent. The Norwegian underground engaged in sabotage, espionage, and intelligence gathering. One of the most famous episodes involved heavy water production at the Vemork plant, heavy water being a component that could facilitate nuclear research. Norwegian commandos, aided by British intelligence and special forces, executed daring raids and sabotage operations that disrupted Germany's nuclear ambitions. You can imagine small groups moving under the cover of night, explosives in backpacks, slipping through snow and rock to strike vital equipment. Those operations did not merely make headlines, they had measurable strategic impacts. Beyond sabotage, Norway contributed in a different maritime way. Its merchant fleet, Norwegian ships captained by sailors who escaped the occupation, formed a significant component of the Allied merchant navy. These vessels carried troops, supplies, and essential cargo across dangerous seas, often under threat from U-boats and Luftwaffe aircraft. Norway's seafarers paid a heavy price, but their contribution was vital to the Allied cause. Sweden's wartime posture was complicated and often misunderstood. Officially neutral, Sweden navigated a precarious path between two great powers. Neutrality didn't mean passivity. Sweden continued exporting iron ore to Germany, a fact that strained relations with Britain and undercut Allied pressure. At times, Swedish territory allowed transit of German troops and material, especially early in the war when Germany moved forces through neighboring Norway. Yet Sweden's neutrality was far from a simple moral equivalence. As the war progressed and the balance of power shifted, Sweden quietly adjusted its policies. It became a refuge for many, accepting Danish and Norwegian refugees and Jews fleeing persecution. Sweden's diplomats and citizens engaged in rescue operations. Hospitals and safe houses sheltered those escaping the horrors of occupation. Raoul Wallenberg, though more famously associated with Hungary, is emblematic of Swedish humanitarian effort during the war. Diplomats and consular staff working quietly to save lives. Importantly, Sweden also provided strategic intelligence and logistics assistance to the Allies, often in ways that didn't make headlines. The country kept a careful balance, keeping the economy afloat, avoiding direct provocation of Germany, but also helping those who needed it when opportunity and conscience allowed. If you want to understand the brutal realities of the Northern Theater, shift your gaze to the Arctic. Here, war is not just about bullets and tanks. It's about frostbite, blizzards, and machinery that refuses to start. The Norwegian and Finnish North areas lying inside the Arctic Circle became battlefields where environmental cruelty amplified human cruelty. In the far north, German and Soviet forces collided with ferocity. The Arctic port of Murmansk in the Soviet Union became a lifeline. Through Murmansk and Arkhangelsk flowed the Arctic convoys, Allied shipments of tanks, food, aircraft, and raw materials crucial to the Soviet war effort. These convoys crossed open, storm-tossed seas under constant threat from German U-boats, surface raiders, and bomber aircraft based in Norway. You can picture ships groaning through ice-stung water, men bundled in oilskins, the horizon a sketch of rolling iron-gray waves. Air attacks, torpedoes, and the bitter cold combined to make these missions some of the deadliest of the war. On land, the Finns and Soviets fought in brutal winter campaigns where temperatures plunged dangerously low, machines failed, human bodies failed, and logistics became the decisive factor. Soldiers who could not move or fight because of frostbite effectively vanished from the battlefield. The Arctic theater demanded a particular kind of soldier, rugged, adaptable, and prepared for long, isolated operations. As the war tipped against Germany by 1944, the situation in Scandinavia shifted dramatically. Finland, having sustained massive losses and facing renewed Soviet pressure, sought peace. In the armistice, Finland agreed to expel German troops from its territory, which led to the Lapland War, Finns fighting to push retreating German forces out of northern Finland. It was an uneasy, tragic chapter, former co-belligerents becoming enemies as the geostrategic landscape changed. Denmark and Norway remained under occupation until Germany's collapse in May 1945. In the final months, resistance movements and Allied operations intensified. Sabotage mounted, intelligence from resistance networks helped the Allies. When German forces finally surrendered, many Scandinavians emerged relieved but altered, both physically and politically. The aftermath was not uniform. Norway had a period of reconstruction and reckoning. Collaborators were tried, and the nation grappled with the trauma of occupation and the legacy of those who had cooperated with the Germans. Denmark similarly worked through its own post-war adjustments. Sweden, having retained neutrality, emerged relatively unscathed physically, though morally and politically it faced scrutiny over its wartime trade and concessions to Germany. Finland paid reparations and made concessions but kept its independence, an outcome that many contemporary observers considered a miracle of realpolitik. If you step back, you'll see that Scandinavia's role in World War II was not about the largest armies or the most famous battles. It was about strategic resources, geography, moral choices, and human improvisation in extreme conditions. In the frozen forests and icy seas, small decisions had outsized consequences. A port opened or closed, a convoy sent or turned back, a rail line seized or sabotaged. The North's iron-fed furnaces, its ports offered Atlantic access, its people sheltered refugees, ferried Jews to safety, and risked their lives to blow up a plant that might have helped build an atomic bomb. Scandinavia reminds you that wartime choices are often about survival, compromise, and the least dangerous path in a world where every option seems perilous. Finland fought to keep its state. Denmark chose surrender to spare its cities and slowly built a moral rescue in 1943. Norway resisted through sabotage and sea power. Sweden walked a tight, pragmatic line, offering shelter when it could, while keeping the nation intact. This northern front didn't change the entire war alone, but it nudged the balance in important ways. The heavy water sabotage slowed a potential German nuclear pathway. Narvik's contest disrupted supply lines. Murmansk convoys kept the Soviet Union in the fight. The deeds of Scandinavian sailors, saboteurs, and everyday citizens had consequences that rippled far beyond the frozen fjords. So next time you picture World War II, let your mind drift northward for a moment. Picture the long, cold nights where choices were made not just by generals but by fishermen, diplomats, and ski troops. In the north, survival often meant choosing the least dangerous path, but sometimes it meant choosing courage. The story of Scandinavia in World War II is a story of quiet significance, strategic, human, and, in many ways, quietly heroic.